Across Britain, church bells had scarcely finished their morning chimes before the newspapers carried a proclamation so astonishing that it silenced breakfast tables from London drawing rooms to the smallest village cottages. Duke Lucien Ashcombe, the widowed master of Ashcombe Palace and one of the wealthiest noblemen in the kingdom, had announced that 50 carefully chosen women would gather beneath his roof to compete for the title of Duchess. The invitation promised no dowry, no political bargain, and no arranged engagement. Instead, it declared that the Duke himself would decide who possessed the character worthy of standing beside him. Within hours, mothers dreamed of crowns for their daughters, ambitious families polished forgotten family crests, and every fashionable salon buzzed with predictions about the woman destined to become mistress of the greatest estate in England. Ashcombe Palace transformed into a spectacle unlike anything the kingdom had witnessed in generations. Carriages lined the winding avenue from dawn until twilight, each more magnificent than the last. Velvet gowns shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers. Emerald necklaces caught candlelight like captured stars. Perfumed conversations drifted through marble corridors where servants hurried with silver trays while musicians filled the air with elegant waltzes. Behind graceful smiles, rivalries bloomed instantly. Every compliment carried hidden calculation. Every glance measured another woman's beauty, fortune, or influence. The palace glittered with luxury, yet beneath its polished surface ambition pulsed like a quiet storm. Standing above the grand staircase, Duke Lucien Ashcombe regarded the gathering with the same detached expression he reserved for parliamentary debates. At 37, he possessed the commanding presence of a man accustomed to obedience. His dark tailored coat fit with military precision, his clean-shaven face revealed sharp, disciplined features, and his gray eyes seemed capable of weighing every soul in the room within a heartbeat. Years earlier, betrayal had shattered the trust he once placed in marriage. His wife's death had ended the scandal but not the wound it left behind. Since then, the Duke had buried tenderness beneath rigid discipline, dedicating every waking hour to protecting the only person whose happiness still mattered to him. Few realized that the magnificent competition unfolding around them had been built upon a lie. When Parliament began demanding that Ashcombe produce another Duchess to stabilize the family's future, Lucien refused every proposal placed before him. Only one person possessed enough influence to challenge his decision: his grandmother, Dowager Duchess Eleanor Ashcombe. Though age had silvered her hair and slowed her step, neither wisdom nor determination had faded. She understood that powerful families survived not merely through wealth but through perception, and the kingdom had begun whispering dangerous questions about the Ashcombe succession. After months of persuasion, she convinced Lucien to hold the competition. He accepted only because refusal threatened the estate itself. Secretly, however, he had already made his choice. He would choose no one. The contest would satisfy Parliament, calm society, and end without a bride. Far beyond London's glittering circles, another invitation rested upon a small wooden table inside a quiet stone cottage surrounded by blooming wildflowers. Miss Rosalie Evermont stared at the elegant seal with bewilderment while her elderly grandmother poured tea into chipped porcelain cups. At 25, Rosalie had never imagined entering aristocratic society. Her life revolved around teaching village children their letters, comforting frightened pupils after difficult harvests, and stretching modest resources to keep the tiny school warm through bitter winters. Beauty had never been her ambition, though kindness had become her nature so completely that she seldom noticed the quiet sacrifices she made each day. "I have no place among duchesses," Rosalie whispered. Her grandmother smiled with gentle certainty. "Perhaps that is exactly why you belong there." Reluctantly, Rosalie agreed, not because she believed she might become a duchess, but because disappointing the woman who had raised her seemed impossible. Days later, her modest carriage rolled beneath Ashcombe Palace's towering gates. Noblewomen stepped gracefully from luxurious coaches draped in silk and satin while footmen unloaded mountains of embroidered luggage. Rosalie climbed down carrying only one neatly packed case. She wore a simple cream-colored dress adorned with delicate black floral embroidery, the same dress she often reserved for church holidays or village celebrations. It fit perfectly, carefully mended by her grandmother's patient hands, yet beside gowns shimmering with diamonds and gold thread it appeared almost painfully ordinary. The moment she entered the ballroom, whispers began. She dressed like a governess. Perhaps she lost her jewels. Or perhaps she never owned any. Lady Vivian Blackmore required only one glance before deciding Rosalie posed no threat. At 30, Vivian embodied aristocratic perfection. Her crimson gown sparkled beneath candlelight, every jewel proclaiming unimaginable wealth. Beautiful, poised, and admired wherever she appeared, She believed becoming Duchess of Ashcombe was not merely possible but inevitable. Watching Rosalie cross the polished floor, Vivian offered a smile polished by years of social warfare. "How thoughtful," she remarked loudly enough for nearby ladies to hear. The palace invited charity as well. Soft laughter rippled through the gathering. Rosalie neither defended herself nor hurried away. She simply thanked a passing servant for directing her toward the reception table, as though the cruel remark had dissolved before reaching her heart. Watching unnoticed from an upper balcony stood 9-year-old Lord Nathaniel Ashcombe. His missing left arm remained hidden beneath the elegant sleeve of his navy velvet coat, while the weakness in his injured leg forced him to lean carefully whenever he walked. Since the carriage accident that had claimed his mother years before, strangers rarely looked into his eyes. Most stared at what had been taken from him instead. He had grown accustomed to polite sympathy, uncomfortable silence, or exaggerated praise for ordinary accomplishments. None of them felt genuine. As the orchestra prepared another graceful dance, Nathaniel settled onto an ornate chair near the ballroom's edge. Reaching awkwardly toward his shoe, he struggled to tighten the loosened lace with one hand. Nearby noblewomen noticed his difficulty. Several exchanged embarrassed glances before deliberately looking elsewhere. Others pretended fascination with paintings or conversations. No one wished to wrinkle expensive gowns by kneeling upon polished marble. Rosalie saw him almost immediately. Without hesitation, she crossed the room, knelt before the young lord in her cream floral dress, and gently steadied the lace between careful fingers. She never looked toward the watching crowd. She never offered pity. Instead, she smiled as though helping him were the most ordinary thing in the world. "Hold this end," she said softly. Nathaniel obeyed. Together they tightened the knot. Then she released the lace before finishing it herself. "Now you complete it." His small fingers managed the final loop. She beamed with quiet pride. Every knot becomes easier when someone believes you can finish it. Across the ballroom, Duke Lucien froze where he stood. Conversations blurred into distant echoes as his gaze settled upon the village teacher kneeling beside his son, not with obligation, admiration, or pity, but with effortless compassion. For the first time in years, something inside the guarded Duke shifted so quietly that even he failed to recognize it. Later that evening, Nathaniel opened the worn leather diary hidden beneath his pillow and wrote a single sentence before closing the book. "Today I met someone who looked at me instead of my arm." Outside his bedroom door, unseen by everyone, the Duke remained standing in silence, unable to forget the woman in the simple cream floral dress. The following morning the ballroom stood empty, its glitter replaced by long tables covered with ledgers, baskets, schoolbooks, tools, and work aprons. Confused murmurs swept through the assembled ladies as Duke Lucien entered with the same composed expression that had unsettled them since their arrival. Without ceremony, he announced that beauty, lineage, dancing, and conversation would earn no advantage. Every candidate would spend the coming days serving the Ashcombe estate as ordinary members of its household. They would teach, repair, organize, comfort, and solve problems. Character, he declared, revealed itself most honestly when applause disappeared. Several noblewomen protested immediately. Lady Vivian insisted such duties belonged to servants rather than future duchesses. Others complained about damaged gloves, muddy paths, and aching backs before the work had even begun. Lucien listened without interruption, then quietly dismissed every objection. Anyone unwilling to participate was free to leave. None departed, because abandoning the competition meant surrendering pride as well as opportunity. Rosalie accepted her assignment with gentle gratitude. She walked each morning to the small village school beside the estate, where cracked windows admitted cold drafts and worn desks bore generations of carved initials. Instead of criticizing the humble building, she rolled up her sleeves, mended torn books with careful stitches, reorganized lessons, and encouraged older children to help younger classmates. By afternoon the classroom felt warmer, not because the weather had changed but because laughter had returned. When lessons ended, she visited elderly servants forgotten by fashionable guests. She carried soup to an aging gardener whose stiff hands no longer trimmed roses easily. She helped the laundresses fold linens while listening to stories about decades spent serving Ashcombe. She thanked every worker by name after learning it only once. Gradually the household stopped seeing her as another contestant and began greeting her as though she already belonged among them. Nathaniel waited eagerly for evening. After supper Rosalie met him in the library, where towering shelves surrounded quiet fireplaces and rain tapped softly against tall windows. She never treated him as fragile. Instead she placed adventure novels before him and invited him to read aloud, taking turns with difficult passages. Whenever he struggled to hold a heavy book, she asked whether he preferred another solution instead of rushing to solve the problem herself. Together they invented clever methods using cushions, ribbons, and wooden stands. Each success belonged to him. The lonely boy changed almost unnoticed. His cautious smile appeared more often. He attempted longer walks through the gardens despite the weakness in his leg. He asked questions without fearing embarrassment. One evening his laughter burst across the library after Rosalie gave every pompous pirate in the story an outrageously dramatic voice. Servants paused outside the doors, exchanging astonished smiles. Many had not heard the young lord laugh since before the accident. Duke Lucien observed these moments from a respectful distance. He never interrupted the lessons, yet he found reasons to cross the library corridor each evening. Watching Rosalie encourage Nathaniel stirred emotions he had disciplined into silence years before. She sought neither praise nor favor. She simply noticed loneliness wherever it lived and answered it with patient kindness. The certainty that no woman could ever enter his heart began to feel less absolute, though he refused to admit the change even to himself. Lady Vivian noticed everything. Every grateful smile directed toward Rosalie sharpened her resentment. She believed compassion was merely another performance, and performances could be destroyed. Quietly she bribed 2 dishonest servants with enough gold to buy their loyalty. Together they conceived a scandal that would expose the village teacher as dishonest before the Duke's growing admiration became impossible to overcome. 3 mornings later panic spread through the stables. Lady Vivian's priceless sapphire necklace had disappeared. Before long a frightened stable boy named Thomas stood surrounded by angry officials. Barely 12 years old, he trembled beside the hayloft while accusations rained upon him. Someone claimed they had seen him near Vivian's chamber. Another servant insisted poor children often stole valuable things. Thomas denied every charge, but fear stole strength from his voice. Rosalie arrived moments before punishment was announced. She asked permission to examine the stable herself. Several ladies laughed openly, amused that a schoolteacher believed she could solve a mystery experienced servants had already settled. Lucien, however, nodded once and allowed her to continue. She moved slowly through the building, noticing details everyone else had ignored. Fresh straw covered only one corner despite the morning chores having ended hours earlier. Muddy footprints approached the hayloft but none returned. A ribbon thread matching Lady Vivian's gown clung to a splintered beam. Climbing carefully, Rosalie reached inside the newly piled hay and withdrew the missing sapphire necklace wrapped in a servant's polishing cloth. The hiding place had been chosen to incriminate the nearest innocent child rather than conceal the jewel. Silence swallowed the stable yard. Thomas burst into relieved tears. Under Lucien's calm questioning, one bribed servant broke first, confessing the entire deception. Lady Vivian concealed her fury behind practiced elegance, claiming complete ignorance while secretly cursing the failure of her plan. The guilty servants were dismissed immediately, and Thomas was restored to his position with public apologies from the estate steward. Rosalie accepted no celebration. She simply knelt before Thomas, brushed dust from his sleeve, and reminded him that truth sometimes walked slowly but always arrived. The boy smiled through tears and Nathaniel watched the exchange with shining eyes. That evening he laughed again while reading beside the fire, filling the palace with a sound that felt almost miraculous. Hidden within the shadows beyond the library doorway, Lord Sebastian Harrow observed the joyful scene in thoughtful silence, realizing the quiet teacher threatened far more than a marriage competition, and for the first time he began planning how to remove her forever. Because if Nathaniel learned to trust again, Lucien might also recover the heart Sebastian needed permanently hardened, and every late ambition toward the Ashcombe inheritance would collapse before one compassionate woman. Winter arrived without mercy. Snow buried the Ashcombe estate beneath silence, transforming elegant gardens into frozen fields where statues wore crowns of ice and bare branches rattled beneath iron skies. Roads disappeared beneath drifts, servants hurried with armfuls of firewood, and every window glowed against the gathering darkness. While most guests complained about the bitter cold, Rosalie found quiet beauty in the season. She wrapped herself in a simple wool cloak, greeted every stable hand with a smile, and continued reading with Nathaniel each evening beside the library fire, where stories seemed warmer than the weather beyond the glass. Nathaniel had grown stronger since her arrival. Although his weakened legs still tired easily and the empty sleeve pinned neatly against his coat remained a visible reminder of old tragedy, he no longer avoided challenges. Rosalie encouraged him to think beyond his limitations instead of around them. She praised determination rather than success, teaching him that courage was measured by effort. Duke Lucien watched his son become more confident with every passing day, and gratitude slowly softened the guarded edges of his heart. For the first time since his wife's death, Ashcombe Palace felt less like a monument to grief and more like a home. Not everyone welcomed the change. Lord Sebastian Harrow concealed his growing alarm behind polished manners and effortless charm. As Lucien's cousin, he enjoyed unrestricted access to the estate and knew every hidden passage, hunting trail, and forgotten building scattered across the vast property. Years of careful manipulation had convinced him that time would eventually place Ashcombe's immense fortune within his reach. Nathaniel's renewed spirit threatened those expectations, while Rosalie's growing influence threatened something even greater. If Lucien learned to trust again, Sebastian's carefully constructed future would crumble beyond repair. The opportunity arrived when a violent snowstorm swept across the countryside. Wind screamed through ancient oaks, shutters trembled against stone walls, and visibility vanished beneath swirling curtains of white. Servants secured doors while guests gathered inside drawing rooms, waiting for the storm to pass. During the confusion, Nathaniel quietly disappeared. His absence went unnoticed for only minutes before panic erupted. Footmen searched corridors. Stable hands checked barns. Guards rode toward distant cottages despite the dangerous weather. Lucien abandoned every appearance of composure, calling his son's name through the roaring wind until his voice grew hoarse. The palace became consumed by desperate urgency. Rosalie refused to surrender to fear. Remembering Nathaniel's habit of exploring forgotten corners of the estate, she searched beyond the obvious paths. Near the edge of the gardens she noticed faint impressions almost erased by fresh snowfall. One footprint dragged slightly, matching Nathaniel's uneven stride. Beside it appeared the familiar mark left by his walking stick. Trusting those fragile signs, she followed the trail into the forest without hesitation. The woods swallowed every sound except the storm. Snow stung her face, branches whipped against her cloak, and frozen air burned inside her lungs. The footprints led toward an abandoned hunting lodge hidden among towering pines, a place long unused after years of neglect. Before Rosalie reached the entrance, smoke curled through the roof. Inside, Nathaniel called weakly for help. A collapsed chimney had scattered burning embers across dry beams, and flames climbed the walls with terrifying speed. Smoke thickened each heartbeat. Splintering timber echoed through the lodge as the roof groaned beneath growing heat. Rosalie pulled her scarf across her mouth and rushed into the burning building. Nathaniel stood trapped beneath a fallen beam on the upper floor, struggling to free his injured leg while coughing through choking smoke. Terror filled his eyes, yet he tried to remain brave when he saw Rosalie climbing toward him. She forced the beam aside despite scorching heat, burning both hands as glowing wood blistered her skin. Fighting pain, she lifted him carefully onto his feet. The staircase collapsed before they reached it. Thinking quickly, Rosalie guided Nathaniel across weakened floorboards toward a narrow servant's ladder at the rear of the lodge. Flames blocked part of the passage, forcing her to shield him with her own body as burning debris rained from above. Together they descended moments before the upper floor crashed inward with a deafening roar. Outside, the blizzard swallowed them immediately. Rosalie stumbled through waist-deep snow carrying as much of Nathaniel's weight as her exhausted body could bear. The freezing wind struck her burned hands like knives, yet she refused to release him. At the forest's edge Lucien reached them after following distant cries. Without speaking, he gathered Rosalie into his arms while another servant wrapped Nathaniel in heavy blankets. The Duke carried her all the way back to the palace, ignoring astonished whispers and the snow collecting across his shoulders. 4 days Rosalie remained confined to bed while physicians treated her injured hands. Nathaniel visited constantly, reading stories aloud because she could no longer hold the books herself. Lucien appeared each evening, though everyone recognized concern hidden beneath his formal questions. Gratitude neither could express openly settled quietly between them, stronger than any declaration. News of the rescue spread far beyond Ashcombe. London newspapers praised the unknown schoolteacher who had risked everything to save the future Duke. Many began calling Rosalie the woman who saved the Ashcombe heir, a title that embarrassed her more than it pleased her. Only Sebastian remained unmoved by public celebration. Hidden inside his private study, he unfolded a map of the estate and calmly burned one marked route leading toward the abandoned lodge. The fire had never been an accident. Every collapsing beam, every delayed alarm, every carefully chosen moment during the storm had served a single purpose. Nathaniel was meant to die before reaching adulthood. Rosalie had unknowingly destroyed years of planning by entering those flames. Watching the smoke curl upward from the burning map, Sebastian whispered that mistakes could still be corrected, and as the palace celebrated its miracle, he quietly chose the gentle teacher as the next life that needed to disappear forever. Morning arrived beneath a sky the color of cold steel, yet Ashcombe Palace no longer felt triumphant. Rosalie's rescue had made her beloved by servants, villagers, and newspapers, but admiration often invited envy. Within days anonymous whispers drifted through drawing rooms, claiming the humble schoolteacher had staged every act of kindness to capture the Duke's affection. Guests repeated the rumors with increasing confidence until suspicion spread faster than truth. Even those who had witnessed her courage began wondering whether compassion itself could be another carefully rehearsed performance. The attack reached its cruelest form when a packet of handwritten letters appeared upon Parliament's committee table. Each page supposedly contained secret declarations of love from Rosalie to Duke Lucien, describing ambitious dreams of becoming Duchess through Nathaniel's trust. The handwriting resembled hers closely enough to deceive casual observers, while forged wax seals suggested hidden meetings beneath moonlit gardens. Newspapers seized the scandal eagerly. Headlines proclaimed that the nation's newest heroine had manipulated a grieving father and his vulnerable son with calculated tenderness. Lady Vivian concealed satisfaction behind graceful concern. She publicly lamented the disappointment while quietly encouraging every conversation that blackened Rosalie's name. Noblewomen who had once mocked the village teacher now congratulated one another for recognizing her supposed deception from the beginning. Their laughter echoed through palace corridors that had recently celebrated her bravery. Every cruel word struck harder because it came after trust had finally begun to bloom. Rosalie refused to defend herself with anger. She knew innocence shouted too loudly often sounded desperate. Instead she met each accusation with calm dignity, insisting only that she had never written the letters. Few believed her. Parliament demanded her immediate dismissal from the competition until the scandal could be investigated. Dowager Duchess Eleanor argued fiercely for patience, but politics favored appearances over fairness. Lucien listened in grim silence while officials questioned the character of the woman who had saved his son's life. Nathaniel understood none of the adult's reasoning. He knew only that the person who had taught him courage now walked the palace carrying invisible wounds no physician could heal. When he asked whether Rosalie would still read with him that evening, no one answered. The silence frightened him more than any storm. Before sunrise the next morning Rosalie quietly packed her single suitcase. She folded the same cream dress with black floral embroidery she had worn upon arriving at Ashcombe, smoothing every crease with bandaged hands still marked by fire. She left no bitter farewell and accepted no escort, believing her departure might spare the Duke and Nathaniel further humiliation. Outside the gates, snow crunched softly beneath her boots as she began the lonely journey toward her village. Nathaniel discovered her absence after breakfast. He searched the library, schoolroom, gardens, and chapel before realizing she had truly gone. That evening he pushed away untouched food, closed his diary without writing a single word, and stared silently through his bedroom window. The lively laughter that had filled Ashcombe disappeared as completely as birds before winter. Watching his son's grief, Lucien finally understood that losing Rosalie had wounded them both. For the first time in years, the Duke stopped trusting appearances and began trusting his own judgment. He reopened every report connected to the scandal, personally examining the letters instead of relying upon officials. Tiny inconsistencies emerged immediately. Certain phrases resembled expressions Rosalie had never used. The paper came from a supplier serving Sebastian's business offices rather than the village school. A wax seal bore microscopic scratches matching one missing from Sebastian's private collection. Each discovery transformed uncertainty into determination. Lucien questioned dismissed servants, traveling merchants, and forgotten witnesses whose stories had previously been ignored. One frightened coachman confessed receiving payment years earlier to alter the route taken by Lucien's late wife on the day of the fatal carriage accident. Another admitted transporting sealed packages between Sebastian and corrupt officials shortly before the recent scandal. Piece by piece, scattered fragments assembled into a horrifying truth. Sebastian had orchestrated everything. The carriage accident that killed Lucien's wife had never been accidental. Sabotaged wheels had overturned deliberately, leaving Nathaniel permanently disabled while removing the Duchess from Sebastian's path. The fire inside the abandoned hunting lodge had been arranged with equal precision. The forged letters, bribed servants, false witnesses, and endless rumors all served one relentless ambition: eliminate every obstacle standing between Sebastian and the Ashcombe inheritance. Rage unlike anything Lucien had ever known settled behind his composed expression. He ordered trusted guards to arrest Sebastian immediately, only to discover his cousin had vanished hours earlier. Worse still, Rosalie had disappeared from every village road. A terrified messenger arrived before dusk with devastating news. Witnesses had seen armed riders forcing a young woman into a closed carriage near the frozen cliffs bordering the northern river. The description matched Rosalie perfectly. Lucien mounted his horse before anyone finished speaking. Nathaniel gripped his father's sleeve with trembling fingers, desperate yet brave enough not to beg. The Duke promised he would bring her home, then rode into the gathering storm with loyal guards racing behind him. Snow whipped across the cliffs as thunder rolled above the valley. Ahead, Sebastian's carriage thundered toward an ancient hanging bridge suspended over a river swollen with black winter waters. The ropes groaned beneath violent winds while frightened horses struggled across the swaying planks. Lucien urged his mount forward without hesitation, knowing every heartbeat separated Rosalie from hope, and every stride carried them toward the bridge where destiny, betrayal, justice, and love would finally collide beneath the unforgiving sky. The storm reached its fiercest fury as Duke Lucien urged his horse onto the ancient hanging bridge. Beneath him, black water crashed against jagged rocks with enough force to swallow men, horses, and hope alike. Ahead, Sebastian's carriage lurched violently across the swaying planks while terrified horses fought against the wind. Inside, Rosalie struggled against the ropes binding her wrists, refusing to surrender even after hours of captivity. She had heard Sebastian confess more than once that kindness was a weakness no ruler could afford. Looking into his cold eyes, she realized he had mistaken compassion for frailty his entire life. The first pistol shot echoed across the gorge. Lucien's horse reared, but the Duke never slowed. Two loyal guards engaged Sebastian's hired men while Lucien reached the carriage just as one of its wheels splintered against the bridge railing. The carriage tipped dangerously toward the river below. Without thinking, Lucien leaped from his saddle, seized the carriage door and tore it open. Rosalie stumbled forward into his arms as the remaining ropes snapped against the broken wood. Before Sebastian could strike again, the damaged bridge gave a deafening groan. The center span collapsed. Lucien pushed Rosalie toward solid ground with every ounce of strength he possessed. She landed safely on the stable side of the bridge while he caught the fraying suspension rope with one hand. Sebastian reached desperately for the same rope, his polished confidence finally replaced by naked terror. For a brief moment their eyes met. "You destroyed my family," Lucien said quietly. Sebastian tried climbing upward, but the soaked rope unraveled beneath his weight. His final scream disappeared beneath the roar of the river as he plunged into the freezing current below. The floodwaters swallowed him before anyone could reach the place where he vanished. Silence settled over the cliffs except for the fading storm. Rosalie rushed back toward the broken edge and helped pull Lucien onto firm ground. Neither spoke at first. Their hands remained tightly clasped, not because either feared falling anymore, but because both suddenly understood how close they had come to losing everything that truly mattered. Within days the investigation concluded. Hidden ledgers, bribery records, forged documents, and sworn testimony uncovered the full extent of Sebastian's crimes. Parliament publicly cleared Rosalie of every accusation. The forged letters were displayed beside the genuine evidence proving her innocence. Those who had mocked her lowered their eyes in shame. Lady Vivian's involvement in spreading the lies became impossible to deny. Though she had never known Sebastian's murderous intentions, her vanity had made her a willing partner in destroying an innocent woman's reputation. Stripped of society's admiration, she quietly left London, discovering too late that wealth could purchase influence but never respect. Ashcombe Palace slowly awakened from months of sorrow. Nathaniel was the first to run, awkwardly but determinedly, through the entrance hall when Rosalie returned. He no longer cared about noble etiquette or watching servants. He threw his single arm around her waist and buried his face against her shoulder. Tears slipped freely down his cheeks. "I thought everyone had stolen you," he whispered. Rosalie knelt despite the tenderness still lingering in her burned hands and gently brushed his hair away from his eyes. "No one could ever take me away from someone who needs me." Nathaniel smiled through fresh tears, and Lucien watched the moment from across the hall with profound gratitude. He had spent years believing strength meant never needing another person. Now he understood that the bravest hearts were often those willing to love despite knowing how easily love could be lost. Several months passed. Winter surrendered to spring. The scarred gardens surrounding Ashcombe Palace burst into life beneath warm sunlight. White roses climbed ancient stone walls, fountains sparkled beneath blue skies, and birds nested among blossoming trees where snow had once buried every path. Across the kingdom, invitations spread once again announcing a gathering at Ashcombe Palace. Society immediately assumed another competition had been arranged. Noble families prepared their daughters with renewed determination, convinced the Duke would finally choose a bride after the recent scandal. The grand ballroom filled once more. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above polished marble floors. Nobles whispered eagerly while musicians waited with silent instruments. Rosalie entered quietly wearing another simple but elegant cream gown, never seeking attention despite every eye following her. Servants smiled as she passed. Villagers invited by Dowager Eleanor bowed with genuine affection rather than obligation. Nathaniel watched from beside his father with unmistakable excitement brightening his face. When the hall fell silent, Duke Lucien stepped onto the platform holding his son's hand. He looked across the assembled crowd before speaking. I invited 50 remarkable women into this palace. No one interrupted. I believed I was conducting a competition to satisfy Parliament and protect my family's future. His gaze slowly found Rosalie. I was wrong. Confused murmurs swept across the ballroom. Lucien smiled for the first time in front of the entire kingdom. I tested 50 women. He paused. But I was never the one making the final choice. Nathaniel looked up at his father. Receiving a gentle nod, the boy released Lucien's hand and began walking through the crowded ballroom. Every noblewoman straightened hopefully. Some smiled confidently. Others adjusted jeweled gloves or elegant gowns. Nathaniel passed every one of them. He continued walking until he stopped directly before Rosalie. For several quiet seconds he simply looked into her eyes exactly as she had once looked into his. Not at his missing arm. Not at the weakness in his leg. Only at him. His small hand reached toward hers. His voice trembled. May I choose my mother now? A single heartbeat seemed to suspend the entire ballroom. Rosalie's eyes filled instantly with tears. She lowered herself to one knee, taking Nathaniel's hand with both of hers as carefully as though it were the most precious gift she had ever received. You already chose me the day you trusted me with your shoelace, she whispered. Nathaniel embraced her tightly. Throughout the hall, even hardened politicians quietly wiped away tears. Lucien descended from the platform and knelt beside them. No servants announced him. No herald declared titles. He was no longer standing there simply as the Duke of Ashcombe. He was a father. He was a man who had finally learned that love was not earned through perfection, beauty, or noble birth, but through countless quiet choices made when nobody expected applause. He reached into his coat and removed a simple velvet box. Inside rested an elegant ring that had belonged to his grandmother's mother, treasured for generations not because of its diamonds but because every Ashcombe Duchess who wore it had been remembered for kindness. Lucien looked into Rosalie's eyes. When you entered this palace, I believed no woman would ever become my wife. His voice softened. When you knelt beside my son, you changed something I thought had died forever. He glanced toward Nathaniel. You gave him confidence. Then back to Rosalie. You gave me hope. Taking a slow breath, he continued. I am not asking you to become my Duchess because the kingdom expects it. I am asking because Ashcombe has become home only when you are in it. And because I never want another sunrise to begin without seeing you beside us. Rosalie smiled through joyful tears. I never came here searching for a crown. She looked affectionately at Nathaniel. I only hoped to help one lonely little boy. Nathaniel squeezed both their hands together. You helped too. Laughter rippled gently through the ballroom. Rosalie nodded. Then my answer is yes. Applause erupted like thunder. Dowager Eleanor closed her eyes with quiet relief, knowing the family she had fought so hard to protect had finally been healed not by politics, but by compassion. Several weeks later, Lucien and Rosalie married in the palace gardens instead of the grand cathedral Parliament had reserved. It was Rosalie's only request. Every servant stood beside dukes and duchesses without separation. Every village child she had taught received an invitation. The former stable boy, Thomas, proudly served as one of the honored attendants before later becoming the estate's head groom through Lucien's encouragement. Nathaniel carried the rings with steady confidence, smiling brighter than anyone present. After the ceremony, Lucien announced that the village school where Rosalie had taught would be rebuilt entirely and renamed the Rosalie Evermont Academy, welcoming children of every background, including those living with disabilities, so that no child would ever feel overlooked as Nathaniel once had. Years later, travelers crossing the countryside still spoke of Ashcombe Palace. They rarely mentioned the competition of 50 women, the political scandal, or the immense fortune hidden behind its stone walls. Instead, they remembered the quiet schoolteacher who arrived wearing a simple cream dress with black flowers, knelt before a lonely little boy when no one else would, uncovered the truth when others chose convenience, walked through fire to save a child who was not her own, forgave those who wounded her without surrendering her dignity, and reminded a broken duke that the greatest inheritance any family could possess was not power or title, but the courage to love again. And whenever Nathaniel was asked how the Duchess had won the competition, he always smiled before answering, "She never competed for my father's heart. She simply cared for mine."